Do you want me to do a clap thing? All right. So I'm going to talk about taking a CLI app and adding a web UI on it using LiveView. And mostly the reason I'm doing this is just to show off some things I think are kind of cool with Elixir. So I have this application that I wrote for work at Quorum. It synchronizes data from our application up into Databricks, Snowflake, Azure SQL, that kind of thing. And I wrote it in Go, mostly because I wanted to write something in Go. But Go also has tons of handy libraries available to it for all of those different database platforms. And it's also really easy to distribute. I can just hand out a binary to customers and they can run it, and that's kind of nice, easy to containerize, et cetera. So I've got this command line thingy, but today that's not so sexy, so I wanted to stick a web UI on it. Let's pretend. So let's say I want something that looks snazzy like this, and I can see my log scrolling live from my browser, and I can start and stop the process, because why not? And we may as well make this multi-user so we can all fight over the same synchronization process, because that seems kind of fun. So that is what we're going to try and accomplish here by the end of it, when we'll see how successful we are in doing that. So the plan is we're going to talk a little bit about Elixir ports. They're a way to have Elixir interact with an external process, because my process is written in Golang and I want to do the rest of this thing in Elixir. We're going to talk not much about gen servers, because that was already covered by somebody far more competent than I. And then mostly for giggles, I want to build a single file Phoenix application that is my front end on this. And I'll talk about why that is in just a little bit. And then we'll make it all live and fancy using Phoenix PubSub. So those are kind of the building blocks here, and it'll be a little bit of a whirlwind, and we'll see where we end up. So starting off with ports, because Elixir can't do everything yet, maybe not always the ideal language for really high performance, like compute intensive things. And sometimes the libraries available to us in Elixir land are not as full-featured as what is available in other tool sets. Ports let us take an OS process and attach them to the beams so that we can send messages to that process through standard in, and we can receive messages from that process, from its standard out, in an Elixir-like way. And I think kind of there are other ways of accomplishing similar things. NIFs are a way of kind of taking other code and plugging them into a running process, but those come with some risk. If the code misbehaves, you might inadvertently bring down the whole Beam VM. Ports are a little bit safer in that regard. So ports are pretty easy to work with. I've got a few examples that I'm going to go through, but roughly you open a port and I say I want to pass in a tuple saying I want to spawn a command, in this case cat, just print some stuff out. I get some options. In this case, I'm just saying that there's some, this is going to be text. If I want to send a command, send something to my port, I'd call port.command and pass in the port, and I can press a message, and that'll get piped into standard in on my process. And then when there is output from that process, that gets sent to my calling process as a message. So I can do receive, and I'll receive that from the port, a tuple with data, and then the actual data that came in. And so here I'm just printing it out. And of course I can close the port. So that lets me start up a process, like an external process to my Elixir thing, send it stuff, receive stuff in a very sort of Elixir-friendly way. So that's building block number one here. Then I had some stuff on gen servers, but again, we'll kind of cover over most of that. But I gloss over that. So where this, I think, gets interesting for the port, when you say port, port.open, that thing gets attached to the process that I did that in. So in this case, I want a port that is usable by my entire web application and shared between multiple users. So I need to kind of be careful about what owns that process. Additionally, I would like to store some state. Let's say I don't want somebody who connects to this process halfway through it running to see a blank page when they log in. I want them to see whatever, say, a buffer of the last 10 lines. So I need to store some state as well as kind of centralizing access to this thing. So the gen servers let us do that. If I own this port in a gen server, then the gen server can deal with receiving messages from the port, managing my little buffer, sending messages elsewhere in the application, as well as giving me kind of an API for, when my web app opens up, for getting the lines out of my buffer. So the plan goes. So what that might look like really naively is something kind of like this. So lots of similar stuff to what Casper was showing us. I've got, I'm using my gen server. I've got my start link that kind of fires it up. I've got a kind of helper called get chunks, and this changed from lines to chunks for a reason I'll mention in a second. So that will retrieve sort of the blobs of data I've received from my process. My init call is going to open that port and then return, again, that OK tuple with my, my state. And so in this case, my state, just as a, I'm blanking on the word for Elixir that we use on the Elixir side, like a map? Dictionary? What do we call them? Maps?
Maps, yeah.
There we go. A map with chunks and then an array of my chunks of data that have come in. So when I'm opening my port here, one little kind of interesting thing, you can use either spawn or spawn executable, and spawn means it's calling through to the shell and saying, here's a command line, like whatever your shell environment is, or bash or fish or whatever. When you do spawn, it's passing the entire thing through to that, and then you are having to get all of your quoting for arguments right. In this case, my argument is just an S, so I probably could accomplish that. But you're kind of relying on the properties of the shell to handle interpreting a command line. Whereas if you do spawn executable, it is not relying on the shell to run this. So when I do that, I'm giving the full path to my process that I want to run, and then I'm breaking out arguments into sort of a separate thing and not leaving it up to the shell to process. But the sort of annoying thing is that instead of, when you're doing spawn, you can get lines, deal with it line by line. When you do spawn executable, you're dealing with maybe lines and maybe not lines. So that aside, open my process, then I've got to handle info call. So this is messages from my port. So every time a message data comes in, one of these chunks, I get a message to my gen server process. It is going to print out that chunk onto the screen, and then it is going to, same kind of thing as what we saw with Casper. This is basically just updating the state in my gen server. So it is prepending that chunk onto my collection of chunks on my state, something like that. And then I have a call, which is one of our synchronous messages to the gen server that is to get the chunks, and that is basically just returning my chunks and then not altering the state. And since the chunks were in last reverse order, I'm reversing them so it looks more normal. So maybe at this point, it might make sense to actually show what some of this looks like. So if I were to run, I've already forgotten the name of this one. Did I give myself internet here? I might want to do that. It's probably going to be really slow doing stuff if it can't actually talk to anything. Probably work better this time. There we go, stuff's coming in. So you can kind of see here, like I'm getting, my chunks include multiple lines here. So they're not necessarily at line boundaries. So this one chunk here comes in and there's, updated a couple documents, and then it's got, sleeping for 3 seconds mashed in on the same line. So that is kind of my naive version of this that just is dealing with these raw chunks and just adding them to the state. But I want to deal with lines, so we can kind of complicate things a little bit and add some code that kind of takes these chunks, and then as a new chunk comes in, kind of adds it to whatever, kind of a buffer of whatever we've received previously that wasn't a whole line, split that on the line binders, and as soon as we have a real line, then spit that out, and then otherwise kind of keep the remainder for the next time we receive something. So I probably could have explained that better, but I want to see something like that where we're seeing normal lines coming across instead of chunks with it, like partial pieces of data. So that's kind of my really basic gen server thing now, just wrapping a port. And I'm going to add some stuff to this to start and stop it, and also send messages out to the rest of my application. But that's kind of my starting point. So I'm using ports to talk to this thing. We've got some logs happening. Things are looking somewhat positive here. So again, using the gen server to store the process, we've got this whole kind of messy thing around capturing chunks and turning them into lines for future use here. We are going to be storing some lines in a buffer so that we can, when we reconnect to the server, we can see some state. And then there will be some online, offline tracking and some API for stuff that we don't have yet, but starting, stopping the process, getting status, that kind of stuff. So I will gloss over a bunch of this if anyone's curious. The code is available and stuff if you want to kind of go further with it. But now that we've got it talking to something, then I want to attach it to a web UI. And I think probably almost everybody in the room has encountered Phoenix. But if not, Phoenix is kind of this super fancy web framework for Elixir. Often, well, always when you create a Phoenix project, there's a lot of stuff that comes with it. You run like, mix phoenix.new, and you end up with a whole folder structure full of your controllers and places to put live views and database migrations and a whole build pipeline for building CSS artifacts and your JavaScript and stuff like that. And if you're somewhat new to it or just trying to do something simple, it's a lot of stuff to sift through to see, to get what it's doing. And which is not to knock it, it's awesome for larger stuff, but if you're just trying to explain a little concept, it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes. So I saw a demo with Chris McCord did a single file Phoenix thing a while ago where it was an AI project. And I thought that was cool, so I kind of wanted to try and do the same thing here myself. So doing a single file Phoenix app is kind of neat. We're going to do that here, just bring in just the essentials to make it a LiveView application, all in one Elixir file. That means we do not have any tools for building CSS or this whole asset pipeline thing, so that's something. But it makes it easy to look at and understand the whole code. Handy for little repros on various things. And we get to see how some of the stuff fits together. So what it might look like, ignoring lots of pieces here. This is a single EXS script or Elixir script file. Something right up at the top is a mix install. So if you use mix as a module and in your script and say mix.install, it will go and fetch any of the dependencies that you don't already have and get those installed on your system before running the rest of the script. So here we're installing Phoenix LiveView because I want to use LiveView for this app. Bandit is the web server, Phoenix HTML for the template stuff, and the JSON library. And then we've got 3 other modules that we need to define. An endpoint is kind of like the entry point into our server and handles kind of the big chunky infrastructure stuff. The HTTP requests go into there and then kind of get passed through to the rest of the application. So from the endpoint, there will be some transformations on the request. Then it'll go into the router, which handles more of our application level concerns. So that's handling like the URL-based routing and doing different stuff for browser sessions versus like an API session. And then we'll have a module for our LiveView component, and my little simple example is a counter. So this is our stateful server-rendered, again, LiveView application. And then there's some stuff down at the bottom for configuration-like stuff. So bootstrapping it with what IPs we're binding this thing to, what port we're listening on, various keys for like session cookies and stuff like that. So a little bit of boilerplate. And then we're doing something similar to what we saw with Casper. We're using the supervisor and starting this endpoint. I guess it would be a gen server? I don't even know. Starting the endpoint process.
The supervisor is gen server,
yeah. So do that, and then there's the process.sleep for infinity, because otherwise this thing will just exit immediately and it'll be a very short-lived adventure. So those are kind of the building blocks that go into this one file here. So if we kind of zoom in a little bit, so the endpoint, because we're using LiveView, we need to set up our LiveView socket, because LiveView, once your application kind of fires up, the LiveView JavaScript is connecting back over a WebSocket to your LiveView process on the Elixir side, and is sort of shuffling messages back and forth. So we need to set up this LiveView socket. I mentioned there's some JavaScript and CSS stuff. Like normally, when you're doing a normal Phoenix project, that includes a whole bunch of JavaScript and CSS that comes with the project and gets built up into these assets that are bundled into your application. I don't have any of that because I've turned all of that off. So I need somewhere to get the Phoenix JavaScript and the Phoenix LiveView JavaScript from. I spend a little bit of time looking to see if I could just find these on a CDN, but that ends up being frustrating because then you have to worry about versions and stuff like that. So it turns out you can just serve them right out of the Phoenix and Phoenix LiveView modules. My plug there, I've got a static asset that I'm serving under /assets, and I'm fetching the file from the Phoenix modules priv static folder, and it's phoenix.js is one of them, and then from LiveView I need the Phoenix LiveView module. So those two things are the two JavaScript resources I need to make this work. I'm not actually using sessions in my stuff, but I might also use bring in the Phoenix session stuff as well so that I can store state between browser sessions. And then we're handing it off to our demo router. So that's kind of the nutshell there for my endpoint. Then the router, we've got kind of, again, more of our application level concerns. So it's got a similar kind of idea that we've got this HTTP request comes in, and then we have a series of plugs that do things to it. In this case, I've got this browser pipeline that just says, for kind of user interactive sessions, I'm going to grab the session, I'm going to do something with flash messages, which I'm not actually using either, and I'm going to use a layout that is defined down there to just wrap whatever comes back from pages and add all this pretty formatting I've applied here. So specifically the references to those two JavaScript files. So most interesting, I guess, is that I am serving under, just on the root of this website, my counter LiveView page. So we've got a basic root template, we've got a LiveView application and some other boilerplate there. And then we can write our LiveView application, which is probably more standard if any of you've seen, probably lots of you have seen this, but this is a really dumb little LiveView counter that's going to have a button and then a counter on it, and when I click the button, counter goes up on the screen. So I've got when the LiveView process gets created, it calls mount and stores some state on the socket, which is going to be my initial count of 0. It's going to then call render, which is going to render this beautiful piece of HTML here. It's going to pass that back up where it gets wrapped in the rest of my template that includes the JavaScript required. And then that JavaScript will do nice, handy things like when I click on this button on the browser side, it will send messages over that WebSocket that turn into an event on my LiveView application that will run this code, which increments the counter, causing the thing to be re-rendered and updated state to get passed across. So I think so all in I think I put these in a different order, but this ends up being kind of the entire application all put together. So I've got my LiveView up at the top. I've got my very basic router, except I added a little bit more styling to make it look a little more snazzy. The endpoint looks very much the same, and then like I said, there's a little bit of extra configuration that I collapsed on the slides, but just to set up what port I'm listening on and some keys for cookie and as secret signing and stuff like that. So if I were to run that one, sorry, what did I leave open on my browser? Today's 4001 was it?
Yeah. 4001.
Oh my goodness. There we go. I'm also having typing issues. So there's my little simple application. Does everyone kind of, like, regarding the LiveView thing, LiveView is like super exciting. Does everybody, is it worth spending a couple minutes talking about why I'm excited about this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I kind of so you guys can pipe up and correct me where I misspeak a little bit here, but the kind of magical thing for me is like I've got this application that feels pretty darn responsive. Like if you've written sort of older style web applications where it's doing a full HTTP post for every button click, every interaction, you're used to that. Like you click a thing, it whirs away for a while, full page reload happens, and it has that sort of sluggish feel. And we've all kind of gone away from that, and we're used to like React and stuff, or like JavaScript type stuff, where we have a whole pile of code on the JavaScript side that is doing kind of lighter weight messages to the server, so that we're not doing full page loads every time. Where, when I kind of a normal thing would be I'd have a bunch of JavaScript, and when I click this button, JavaScript will send a lightweight message to the server saying the counter's incremented, I get back a response, and then, well, probably we just count it on the JavaScript side and not talk to the server at all. But that aside, we'd kind of have that, something like that happening. But the problem with that is that like now I have to learn how to write JavaScript and maintain all of this, and also write a bunch of back-end code, say, and I don't have enough brain power to do both of those things at the same time. So a really cool thing with Elixir here and Phoenix LiveView is that you'll see like I'm not writing JavaScript here myself. Like there is some JavaScript that makes this work, but when I go to this LiveView page on my browser, we are creating a kind of instance of this LiveView application for me. Like each user who goes here ends up with another of these super lightweight Elixir processes that is running and that stores their state. So this Elixir, like my Phoenix server, has a bunch of instances of this running, and in my case, my application has a WebSocket kind of connection back to this server. I'm not explaining it super well, but all of the kind of interaction code and the code that I'm writing is Elixir land stuff. And there's this library that comes with Phoenix LiveView that takes all of the JavaScript events like button pushes, text entry into a field, that kind of thing. And it is taking those and bundling that up and pushing it over a WebSocket back to my application where it comes in kind of as an event. I can do whatever it is I want to do, writing just Elixir code, and then I can update the state in my kind of running instance here. And then it will trigger a re-render, and then it'll just send back just the differences to the browser side. So it ends up feeling almost as fast as what you get with like a React or something, because we're not doing full page reloads. We're just sending kind of partial updates. And we don't have all the overhead of like reestablishing a full HTTP connection on every single interaction, because we've got a long-running socket. But again, I'm not having to learn and kind of mentally deal with like half of my code is in React and half of my code is in something else. It's all kind of one tool set. And then you run into bits of JavaScript you're running, but it's not nearly as much as you would be doing otherwise. How badly did I butcher that?
Can I add one
Yes,
thing
please.
as an addendum? Like, if anybody, I think there are front-end developers here. So as a front-end developer, you often have to basically have a front-end state, right? And so now, effectively, you have a front-end state and you have a back-end state. Now your state is sort of like split between different things. Maybe your front-end is in React, maybe your back-end is in Java or whatever other thing. And so now you're basically having these two different states that are like potentially out of sync. And then it's like, which place are we meant to keep track of this particular thing? Whereas this is like, your state is in one place, it's on your server, easy to test, and your front end basically does next to nothing, like especially from the testing perspective. And it's just very simple in terms of implementation and trying to understand what's happening. So you don't have to worry about like some sort of a front end database, you don't have to worry about sagas, you don't have to worry about things that are kind of like state management sort of tools. You don't have to worry about your users, owning you because they found a backdoor that you had to build because whatever. It prevents so many problems.
Yeah, you kind of said the one more thing. I'm not having to write I don't have to write a whole bunch of extra APIs to manage syncing the state between my client, like the JavaScript side and the back end if I don't want to. I still might choose to, but yeah.
So when you roll out a new release, does it preserve the state, this application?
If I were to roll out a new version of...
So the user right now, the system is live, I'm pressing the button assign on the number 10 counter, when you roll out a new release, and I click again, what happens?
I suspect I would lose that state, depending on what I did there, but Kevin's got the right answer. Yeah?
If you need it badly enough, you could kind of like roll your own, and I think that there is actually a library that does this to basically like preserve a gen server state, and like Discord kind of famously within the Elixir community actually did roll their own like gen server migration tool. So like all the stuff that's running in Discord, and that's mostly running in a lot of it is running in Elixir, and so then they have a lot of stateful aspects. So they had to write their own gen server migration thing. So you basically like dumping one gen server state, start putting it into the next one. But in practical terms, if it's important, put it in the database. For like everyday commenters, peasants like us, if it's important, put it in the database. Most of the stuff that you're going to be storing in your connection has to do with like, is the user logged in, you know, those types of things, and like that would already be in the database. But otherwise, the state of the connection is like, is the user actually like connected to the page and the status of the connection?
Short-term form
The team will
contents.
tell you that you can live load code, you can live replace your code, and you know, so your code changes out underneath your what you've got in memory, and it'll tell you you can do that, and it can. I can't recommend it. It's the most terrifying thing you'll do in production is to leave the server running and change the code while it's running.
But it's fun.
Well, if you consider it's stress fun, yes, it's quite a bit of fun.
Changing a tire while driving.
High stress. So you see, that was something important in the Beam world back before we just pop up a server anywhere and replace the code, ripple out a replacement to all our servers instead of trying to keep that one server alive all the time. So yeah, it's you can do it, but don't. You might have fun playing with it,
Yeah.
but if you do it in production, it's terrifying.
It is the underlying thing of like how you can hot reload your Phoenix app, for example, where you can hot reload all kinds of things. But another advanced answer for people that are really wanting to dive deep into it, there's a great article, if you Google pipeline of airbags by Fred E. Bear. It's at ferd.ca. He basically talks about like they had this like hot upgrade path, but then I think he was working for Heroku at the time. They said everybody's moving to Kubernetes, and so then they basically like forced everybody onto that. But they actually had their process, they had it ironed out, and then putting it back into Kubernetes actually made it more unstable. Because like Kubernetes is like nothing is a silver bullet. So everything has its place, but whether or not it's worth it in your use case is like a different story. But yes, terrifying if you have to do it by hand. That is actually how they intended you to do it with Irvine.
How's it dealing with split brain? So like if they're physically no connection, socket will forcibly closed. So what will happen like if you click like next time, even if physically connection can be reestablished? Does Phoenix LiveView handle that?
Sorry
It
if
basically just gives you like a status bar that's like can't find the internet.
So it will not try to like self-recover like if
you're thinking if I were to kill my application here, and then go back to my
It'll come back.
Yeah.
Like once the internet is back. Yeah.
so while it's offline, I think I am missing the usual status bar because I'm probably missing large swaths of the formatting here, but normally you get like a little bar up here when it can't, the socket is not established, and like my application has stopped responding.
That console, you can see it probably in the console.
Browser
What's
con?
your question is, will the page crash or will?
basically what will happen, so like if you have like intermittent internet connectivity issue and like socket being closed, like what will happen like if your server is running, your page is working, and like the socket being closed.
The JavaScript on the page is trying to get it back. So always
So you will try to
yeah.
Okay.
It's designed to try to reconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in this case, it did reconnect, but I'm not storing any of the state anywhere durable, so it's all gone, and my counter, I lost all that work.
Back to square seven.
Yeah.
Stateful versus stateless.
So kind of back to this, like I'm not sure you'd do anything of any like serious complexity doing a single file thing, but it's kind of neat to see, like you get to sort of see some of the building blocks, because otherwise a brand new Phoenix project is a lot of moving parts to stare at, and so it's kind of, I find it interesting to kind of poke at. Again, maybe there's some argument around deployment, but containers make deployment kind of easy, and I'm not sure that really matters, so. Off here. Oh, I did have a picture on how I understand some of this stuff to work. I'm not sure that we want to go through all of this here, I wasn't sure where I'd get to today, but oh, that's blurry as heck. We'll move on. So the last thing I was going to just mention is pub sub. So like we've got a really basic Phoenix LiveView app with a counter so far. We've talked about ports. Now to sort of lash all this together, I would like to be able to, when new messages come in on my console app, because that's where we started our journey, I want those messages to get broadcast to every browser that's listening right now so that they all see that message at the same time. And Phoenix has a module called PubSub that makes this really easy, where you can have a process, or I guess possibly multiple processes, I'm not sure, broadcast, and many people can listen, and they're kind of decoupled from each other so that the broadcaster is not having to put a bunch of effort into figuring out, maintaining a list of everyone who's interested in hearing about new messages. The consumers can subscribe and the publishers can just fire messages off, and whoever's listening will get it. And there's some nice stuff around it working across Elixir nodes as well, which is kind of neat. So roughly what I'm going to end up doing here is in my gen server. So this is back where I'm receiving a message from my port. So you've got a new line of input, let's say. Phoenix pub sub you can call broadcast. You give it the name of your pub sub module, and then you give it kind of a channel, which is used to filter them out so that you can kind of be selective about which messages you're consuming. And then you give it a message. So here a tuple that is new line, and then my line contents. So that's kind of what in my gen server I'm going to be adding to publish a message. And then in my live view, I am going to basically subscribe, same module, choose the same channel. And once I do that, when new messages are published up from the gen server, imagine, again, these are different blocks of code. Those pub sub messages will get passed into my live view or sent to my live view process, which I can then use to update the state on my live view process. So in this case, I'm sticking the received line onto my collection of lines. And then because I'm changing the state on a live view process, that causes it to re-render, and then that goes across onto the browser side, something like that. So it's like pretty straightforward to do. The one little nuance there is this if connected socket. So live view kind of calls, the way I understand it, the mount function gets called twice. The very first time you go to the page, it calls mount with like the HTTP context, like it doesn't have a socket established yet. So the very first time it connects, it sort of sets some initial state, then it calls render, gives a page over to the browser then renders that, then establishes a WebSocket, then creates this process again, says mount, but this time it has a socket attached to it, so it can start doing the messaging. So this if connected socket is checking to see, is this a real live view process where we're going to have this communication where we've got an established WebSocket versus that initial handshake type thing. If we kind of go into sort of the full version of this, again, not sure how well this is going to show on the screen, but we've got the final version of all of these different things. So we've got all of the building blocks that we've talked about. We've got our gen server for our log streamer. So we've kind of glossed over a bunch of this, but we've kind of got our friendly public API where we've got get buffer reads the contents of my current state. We've got a start and stop thing, just because I want to be able to start and stop this integration server, because why not? And then a status call to read the state of whether this thing is running. We have our state that's managed in the gen server is the buffer of lines, and then also this like remainder of like partial lines from previous messages it's received. And then we've got kind of our the actual implementations of getting the buffer, starting and stopping processes, that kind of thing. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time scrolling through all of this. So that's our gen server component, line parsing, blah, 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 blah. Eventually we've got our start call that's actually starting our port, so that part looks familiar. And then we've got some broadcast wrappers here that are just a method. So in my gen server, I have this pub/sub broadcast call that we just talked about that is going to get used when I receive new lines. You can see when the message is, when I've got a start message, I'm broadcasting it with Phoenix pub/sub from this gen server. So we'll see what that looks like in a second. The rest of this looks a little bit more cookie cutter. We've got our router, which is the same stuff we saw before. I've just got this one live view, logs live. Again, the template is a little bit longer because I stuck some CSS in there and that kind of thing. We've got our...
Yes, about template. Is there like a pneumatic way to handle templates? Because you probably don't want them to be integrated in your code.
Yeah, I mean, there's Phoenix, like when you make a Phoenix project, they're broken out into separate files and there are
And it just
patterns for them.
refer to a file and like that.
Yeah, I just smashed everything together into one file, so yeah. So my logs live, this is probably the most interesting component for all of this. So this is the live view for my log viewer. So it's got some of the stuff that we've just seen. It's got this connecting to the Phoenix pub sub for getting our messages. Then we initialize some state. So we've got a page title. We've got some lines that are going to be from the log streamer, just get the current state of all the lines in the buffer, and also the online status. And we're going to just store those in state on my live view process. Then we are going to receive some different kinds of messages. We'll receive a log line, and when we get one of those, we want to append it onto our list of lines, and maybe so we don't just end up growing indefinitely, trim that to 20 most recent log lines. When the status changes, we want to capture that and update our state as well. We have a couple different buttons that we're going to have. So we're going to have a start and stop button. So those are just going to call the start and stop methods on our streamer object, which will kill and adjust or manage our process. And then we've got some HTML stuff that is the actual page. And I don't remember if I started this one yet. I did not. So do that. And then beyond that, it's the same endpoint stuff that we saw before. For the most part, we've got it serving our static assets, calling the router. I've got a error page just for file not found, which is just sort of a bonus thing. And then there's our setup stuff at the bottom. So it's definitely longer than what we had before, but like the guts of it are kind of in that gen server and the log live view. And sorry, to make a long story short here, then the end result is something. Did the port change? Good thing you guys are paying attention. There we go. So you see, I came in here and I've already got log messages. That's fun. I can start and stop things. That's exciting. And if I open multiple browser windows on this, this is one of the things I really like about PubSub. If I open another one of these guys, the messaging kind of goes to all of the so there are